A true innovator in his own right, Monty Hamilton. Monty leads the executive team and drives the strategy for rural sourcing. This is his second startup after leaving Accenture in 1995. So welcome, Monty, and thank you for being our keynote.
So in 1987, Gordon Gekko was my hero. Now, for those of you who were born in the 70s and later, you may not know who Gordon Gekko is, so I'll give you a little bit of background here. Gordon Gekko was the star of Oliver Stone's movie Wall Street. Came out in 1987, did really, really well. Gordon Gekko was the central character of that movie. Now, he was a data-driven, hard-charging Wall Street titan. His ethos was greed is good, and he had absolutely no moral compass. So before you get all judgy on me about my pick of heroes, okay, let me give you a little context for where I was in 1987. I just sold all the meager belongings I had. I took out a bunch of student loans so that I could go back and get my MBA and learn how to be a business person, and my version of Gordon Gekko. 30 years later, I stand before you, a t-shirt wearing CEO of a mission-oriented, purpose-driven company backed by a social investment arm of a private equity company. What happened? Did I lose my edge? Did I get soft? Was I abducted by aliens? I mean, Jemai, we are here in New Mexico, right? I don't think it was any of those things. I think over the past 30 years, I've matured a little bit. I think at least my wife would give me a little credit for that. I've learned a lot about business and its impact on society. And most importantly, I've learned a lot about myself. And one of the things I've learned is what brings me fulfillment and happiness in my work life today is so very different than what I thought it was 30 years ago. See, 30 years ago, I thought that the measurement of success was all about the money. And I have, if you look at my family tree, it is chock full of Baptist preachers. And so they would say that I might have even found my calling as a social entrepreneur, just as many of you have here in this room today. And the good news is our ranks are growing each and every day. Today, there are more than 2,500 B Corps registered. And B Corps are those benefit corporations that have as a part of their charter and their mission and their legal documentation to manage both purpose as well as profit. Now, also, I think over the course of this time, I've been impressed with what I've heard coming out of major corporations these days. More and more good stories about companies intentionally doing good. You even have publicly traded CEOs like Mark Benioff and Howard Schultz reaching out and grabbing on to third-rail social gnarly issues and hanging on in order to impact change. You also have folks like Mark Cuban, who was recently quoted as saying, "Social entrepreneurs are the future of capitalism." Now, I get it, I'm probably more attuned to these kinds of stories and these kinds of sayings and messages than I used to be. But there's also hard evidence today that this whole social entrepreneurialism, impact investing, and conscious capitalism is growing. The Global Impact Institute research from 2017 showed that there was over $228 billion earmarked for investments, assets under management, specifically for social enterprises. Today, in 2019, that number has more than doubled to over $500 billion for social enterprises. So the number is growing and people are getting the message. Even the Business Roundtable, which is a who's who of American CEOs, just recently redefined the purpose of a company. Now, from 1997 until just recently, the purpose of a company was defined as follows: maximize profits. Largely guided by Milton Friedman's free market capitalism and shareholder primacy, all you had to do as a CEO, as a board, was focus on maximizing profits and therefore maximizing shareholder returns. Just 2 months ago now, the Business Roundtable redefined that purpose of a company. And today, those stakeholders are a much broader group. The purpose talks about how you treat your employees, the well-being of your consumers, how you treat your vendors, how you treat the environment. What do you do to give back to your community? And yes, of course, a return for your shareholders. But even then, the language is talking about a long-term return, not a quarterly return. Fortune magazine, each year for the past 5 years, has identified companies that they believe are changing the world. The interesting thing about that this past year is they took the publicly traded companies in that group, they put them into an index fund to evaluate the return to the shareholders. They measured that return against the Morgan Stanley Capital Index return. And guess who won? Those companies that are being world changers and are doing good in the world. So there's hard evidence that companies who lean into this idea of a more holistic view of their impact on society can return better returns to their shareholders. And one thing I know for sure, in a culture of capitalism, we all, myself included, look toward companies that are doing well, that are being successful, and mimic those and try to take those things that they're doing well and bring them into our own businesses so that we can repeat that success. So I believe you're going to see more and more of this over the coming years. So this kind of begs the question of why now? Why are we seeing this sea change? And in my personal opinion, I believe we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the millennials and the Gen Xers out there. Now, yeah, that same group that's been vilified in the press about how they dress and how they look and what they do and what they don't do, that group of individuals today represents more than 68% of the workforce, according to Pew Research. So, if you work in a corporation, you want those two groups of people, those individuals in your company engaged, helping drive success and change in your companies, then you damn well better stand for something other than maximizing profits, or you won't get them. Now, also, this group of people, they're big consumers, and they have a big wallet these days, over $40 billion in spend annually. And they've helped put companies like Tom Shoes, Warby Parker, Seventh Generation into the stratosphere. But lest you think it's just the new internet models that are doing good in the world, I want to share a quick story with you about a friend of mine named Randy Lewis. Randy is retired now, but before he retired, he was the executive vice president at Walgreens for supply chain. all of Walgreens. Walgreens is a 105-year-old company, $100 billion revenue company, so it's huge. Before Randy retired, one of his last big projects was to set up a new distribution center in Anderson, South Carolina to support the growing demand for Walgreens. And so he put his proposal together and went to the board for a fair amount of money, but he also made a very bold move and a bold ask at that board meeting. Oh, by the way, this is my friend Randy. Randy happens to be the father of an autistic child. And it was through that firsthand experience he learned how difficult it is for people with disabilities to get jobs, even when they're perfectly qualified and can do the work. So Randy's ask of the board that day was, I'm going to go there and build this center. We're going to hire 600 people, and 200 of those people are going to be people with disabilities. So 1 out of every 3 positions in that distribution center would be filled with a person with a disability. So the board approved Randy's plan, but with one caveat. They said, Randy, in no way, shape, or form can this DC perform any differently than any other distribution center. So Randy took that challenge. He went to Anderson, South Carolina. He built that center. He hired those 200 people with disabilities, and he stood it up. Today, that distribution center is visited by companies from all over the world to see what Randy did and how he did it. Now, the distribution center did perform differently than all the other DCs in the system. In fact, it performed a hell of a lot better than the other DCs. And so it's amazing what people can do when given the opportunity. So what I'd like to leave you with, one more thing. Randy wrote a book once he retired, and he coined this phrase called NOGWOG. NOGWOG stands for no greatness without goodness, which is the title of his book. So here's what I want to leave you with. If folks like Randy Lewis and I can shift our mindsets from a greed is good to a no greatness without goodness, then we're on the right path and we're headed in the right direction. And just as the name of this conference says, if I can get it up, whoops. Shift happens. And I've personally seen that shift in my own life and the lives of many other people. But here's the key takeaway. Shift happens when people like you all in this audience today, the social entrepreneurs, the crazies who see things just a little bit differently and aren't willing to follow the normal path, you all get out there and you make shit happen. Thank you.